Now, they look to us like completely independent shapes, don't they? We've come across them, they're really, really grand. But actually, it turns out, I'm going to ask you to do just a little bit of mind work, but I'm going to show you a picture of the result. I want you to imagine that this is a dice that's got 1 spots on each of its faces, okay? And that inside the cube, you're going to join the dot on the top to the 4 dots on the side, and the dot on the bottom to the 4 dots on the side, okay? And in your head, hopefully you'll be seeing one of these, okay? So what's inside this is an etheric one of these, and you can see that the points of this meet the centres of the face of that. So these two shapes in a way are kind of interchangeable. What you could do is you could chop the bits off this that aren't a cube to make a cube, and then you could chop the bits off this that make it a cube to make it another one of these, and you could just go on forever. But they're sort of mutually reliant. So the symbol for earth and air together. Now, the thing is that if you imagine there's 1 dot on the face of each of these, and you join them together inside, you'd obviously have a square on the face that's facing you. Can everybody see that? If we had a dot on each of these faces and you joined them inside, there'd be a square. So, understandably, what you get inside your octahedron is a cube. So these are kind of like a balanced couple. Now, if you imagine that this cube, we'll call it the contents, and we'll call the yellow the container, you can see its points are right in the centre of the faces of the octahedron, yes? The container. If we imagine the cube growing so that its points pierce these faces until the edges of the cube are as long as the edges of the container, the octahedron, what you'll see is a wholly new shape, which looks like this. Okay? So not only are these two things actually reflections of each other, they also bond together to make a unique individual. Synthesis through 2 parts, making a unique new part. And the new thing has 8 triangles and 6 squares in it. So it shares the nature of its parents. And we have one here. I shall again hand these round for people to look at. This is one of those. Can everybody see that there is a cube in this shape? Yes? And everybody can see there's an octahedron too. And one is wrapped round the other. We should imagine these shapes as being actually in motion, more like this. They're waveforms, do you know what I mean? What we've got is like little photographs of them. If you come and play with them like this, you'll see all sorts of shapes in the middle of them. But one of the interesting things, you remember when we first looked at the Koch snowflake, we had a triangle upside down in another triangle, and another triangle upside down in that? Well, if we look at this shape in a certain way, you can see that there's a little triangle upside down in a big triangle, okay? Now, I'm going to whip through the next ones because exactly the same thing is true of these two. If you put a dot, I'll hand that out. If you put a dot in the centre of all the faces of this shape and join them together inside, you'll get a picture of one of these. You'll get an icosahedron, okay? So, in the same way that that shape is made, inside one of these is one of these, and if we put dots in the centres of these faces, we'll find one of those. Now that is the marriage of earth and ether, the two, water and ether, the 2 universal growth media. Absolutely fantastic. Once again, if you imagine that the inside figure grows until its sides are as long as the outside figure, you get another really new, beautiful shape. Isn't that gorgeous? And again, this is a flat picture, but your eyes are really making it 3D for you, aren't they? You remember this shape. So that's those two. As you all look, I've squeezed it. As you might expect, we have here we've got a model of one of these, with one of these in the middle of it, so that you can actually see it happening in a model. I'll hand them all that way because it saves me wandering around too much. And if we now return just to that picture for a moment, I've got a model of one of those as well. So here we've got, if I hold it up, now can everybody see that there is, it's a bit harder to see, but there's a dodecahedron in here, so there's one of these with 12 hexagonal faces. You should all have one, pentagonal, sorry, should all have one facing you. You can come and look more closely at them, and then there's one of these embedded in it. Once again, it looks really spectacular when it's spinning. It actually represents the marriage of, like I say, water and ether. And once again, if we stop it and hold it up, you can see that it's actually made up of an upside down little triangle inside a big triangle. Okay, so everybody see that? See there's a little triangle here and a big triangle there around it. So in a way, this is made up as the same thing as the other one is. Again, it's triangles, and it's really that thing, but lent together in the third dimension in a really ingenious way. That, of course, so we now know that these two are not individual parts. These are kind of like correspondent. What happens if we do that with this? Fire. You get another one in the middle, a little baby one. And if you imagine that baby one growing until it comes out of one of these, you end up with one of my favourite shapes, a star tetrahedron, which looks like oh, there it is. God, I was going to say it must be here. Looks like this. This is a symbol of organic balance. What can everybody see? There's a tetrahedron pointing upwards, and there's a tetrahedron pointing downwards. So anybody who's familiar with the Flower of Life and Merkaba work, this is the shape of your Merkaba. It extends Leonardo-like to the end of your arms and to about, I think, 18 inches above your head and below you. And this is the energy field that surrounds you. There's one that spins clockwise, one that spins anti-clockwise, and one that stays steady around you. Interestingly enough, inside this shape, which also is a cube, if I point it to you like that, you can see that it's also a cube, there's actually an octahedron. Inside this shape, there's one of these. So it means that when fire meets fire, you get air in the middle of it, which is another marriage that I really particularly love. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about hypergeometry in a bit, not immediately, but in a bit. And this is one of the true hypergeometric shapes. Hyper means literally above, a level above. So a hypersquare is a cube. Okay, a hypercube, we'll show you in a little bit. But this is said to be one of the purest pieces of hypergeometry, because if you look at it, it's entirely made up of tetrahedra. It's made up of the seed geometry of which it is a reflection, which is another show of how things can actually kind of grow and become bigger. Absolutely beautiful shape. It's, I think, yeah, you can move the string upwards. So do feel free to have a spin of them. So there, we've had a look at the, way, I love them. Look at that. Sorry, off you go. So those are our 5 basic shapes, and we've looked at another couple there. There are actually 18 different shapes of creation, and we're going to whip through them. It requires a little bit of imagination. There's 2 ways. Some of the shapes that we're looking for we've already seen. I need to have a look at the well, we'll have a look a little bit later, actually. I'll just tell you that they're there. When we looked at that marriage of earth and air, which is the marriage of the cube and the octahedron, remember I showed it to you, and it had triangle inside triangle, which is actually, I forgot to say, sorry, this one as well, if I show it to you, it's a triangle upside down in another triangle, lent together in another intriguing fashion. So they're all triangles inside triangles. And in the middle of that shape, I showed you an octahedron. Yes, one of these. Does everybody remember that? Well done. Well, in the middle of the marriage of earth and air, which is currently coming around over there, there is one of these. And this is one of the first shapes that breaks a circle into 2 different shape bits. Do you see? So this one's made up of triangles and squares. Every square's got a triangle on the edge of it, and every triangle meets a square. It's a really beautiful shape, one of my favourites. And it's effectively a shape that really sits between earth and air. Cube octahedron, that one is called, and as you would expect, in between the places where the dodecahedron and icosahedron meet, you find one of these. Now, once again, when we looked at it, what we saw was faces made up of triangles upside down in other triangles. But if when it comes round you imagine knocking all the points off it, at the places where the 2 shapes meet, at the places where these 2 shapes meet, is one of these. And these are called by the classical people feminine shapes. So whereas the masculine shapes make physical form, the feminine shapes sit at the bonding points between. So it's more to do with the internal workings of the system. And this shape, like I say, has got 12 pentagons and 20 triangles on it. So again, it has the same number of shapes as its two parents. And it's important to realise that if these edges here were the same length as the edges on the original models, this would be a much bigger shape. So do you see it's not only a reflection of its parents, it's also grown. Okay. So in between those two, we've got one of those.